Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A. I am your host for today, Peter Dixon. Just pressing a few buttons here. Sorry about that. There we go. I normally do a 5-minute intro to get all the buttons pushed. I'm experimenting doing it a bit shorter. My very special guest today is Tammy Pannekoek. Great to have you with us today, Tammy.
It's good to be here.
And look, this is episode number 26 of season 3. It's incredible how we've just kind of kept on going over lockdown, and it's been absolutely fascinating to be front row and center as I've been interviewing lots of really interesting people. And this season, we've spent quite a lot of the interviews talking to people or allies of people that are LGBTQIA plus. And today is no exception. Tammy, you and I are going to have a conversation about your being an ally of that community. And we're speaking specifically with those in that community that align themselves with the Seventh day Adventist faith, that call themselves an Adventist. So, for those that don't know who you are, just share a little bit of background of who Tammy Pannekoek is, and then we'll kind of talk a bit further into the topic of the day.
Yeah, well, as the little promo paragraph said, at least third generation. I don't know whether my grandparents' parents, my great grandparents, were Adventist or not. They're not around to ask anymore, but definitely very not widely, but deeply entrenched in the Adventist culture. Growing up, it's just a part of who I am. Um, I was born, if you can tell by my accent, it's a bit funny. um, I was born in the US, Chicago, and then Phoenix, did high school in Phoenix, but went to summer camp and met my Australian husband there. We had a summer camp romance, and when he went back to Australia, we missed each other a lot, so just decided to get married so we could be together. So 26 years ago, I immigrated to Australia. And been here since then. I started study at Avondale College, had 2 kids in between finishing the degree. Always heavily involved in church, especially because I like to sing. I was going to be a famous singer, but that didn't end up happening. But yeah, that sort of ties into a bit too. I've always been a black and white sort of thinker, a very conservative person. Right is right and wrong is wrong. And with my singing, my voice teacher told me that it would be better for my voice if I was vegan. So when we were newly married, we were um, very much rule keepers, very conservative, very. And then I had the kids when I was 23, so I was fairly young, but not right after we got married. But once they were still young when I decided I would record an album to see how my singing would go, and that's where Peter and I know each other from. I can't actually hear you, Peter.
How about now? There
Yes, that's better.
I keep pressing the mute button. Yeah, that's how we met. And can I just add that you do have a beautiful voice, and
You're very kind.
I think, yeah, I wouldn't be judging successful singer based on any certain criteria. The key is to be creative, produce the work, enjoy the process, and lots
Yeah.
of people enjoy your music and your singing.
Yeah, well, as Peter will remember, we were conservative enough that I didn't want any drums on my album when we
Yeah.
recorded that. And Peter was so very gracious and kind and just, oh, whatever you want, we'll make it work. And but yeah, that's sort of where I come from in regards to my theology, my worldview. But I've done a lot of growing and changing since those early days. And I guess that's what I'm here to talk about.
Yeah, because back then you may have had a totally different view on your stance for the LGBTQ plus community. Can you share with us um, a little bit of how, if you put yourself back to that time when we first
Mm.
met and you're doing the recording.
Yeah.
Imagine we were having a conversation right then. What do you think what would we have been talking about on a show like this back then?
Well, that kind of speaks to my privilege because I really hadn't thought about it at all. And I only had what I sort of knew to be true from messages growing up, and not even like really strong messages, but just, the unconscious attitude that if you would have brought it up, I probably would have been shocked that we were even talking about it, number one. And
Mm,
I'm a very private sort of person. I don't like talking about sex or, things like that. That's all private, we don't talk about those sorts of things. And I would have just assumed, poor Peter, doesn't realize that that's a dangerous sort of place to be, the lifestyle. And I had all those assumptions that anybody who hasn't actually given the topic a lot of thought or a lot of research would have, that those. And I just am ashamed to say the sort of attitudes I had at the time, but I just would have assumed that um, our beautiful LGBTQ plus our rainbow people, I would have assumed that they were choosing a lifestyle outside of the church, outside of
mm.
religion, and that was a dangerous place to be.
Yeah, and I think all of us, it's good to go, look, boy, we're not thinking that anymore. But I think we've also got to be a little bit kind to ourselves because we're all products of our genes and we're products of our history and nature and nurture combined.
Yeah,
And sometimes coming to new views and a better understanding of even what the Bible is teaching on this topic, coming to a better understanding of what the teachings of Jesus were, that can take a long time to kind of get past the indoctrination that we may have had that wasn't so accepting. I
yeah.
was reading recently that you can take 25 years to really un, what's the word, uncondition or decondition yourself or deconstruct
Deprogram,
yourself,
deprogram.
deprogram. Yes, perfect. And I, when I read that, I looked back to my way of thinking, and I can see a long journey.
Yeah,
Not
most
so much in
definitely.
that area because I was doing lots of sort of secular music at the time and playing in all sorts of venues, and it was quite a normal. A lot of musicians and artists and creatives were gay, and it just was a very normal part of my life. But theologically, it took a long time to get rid of generations of indoctrination and deprogram. So I
Yeah,
think, yeah, and what I've found in having these discussions, how gracious that community has been, the LGBTQ plus community, how gracious they've been at the mistakes we've all admitted, and they're
mm,
just excited that finally we're kind of speaking about it and being allies. And um, when I signed up as a member of kinship, and I kind of just was a light went on. Oh, I can be a member even though I'm not gay.
yeah,
Awesome.
yeah,
So those watching, I encourage you, go and sign up to kinship. And yeah, so that's the Tammy of that we would have chatted to back then. Tell us
yeah.
a little bit of the transition. How did you transition from a less inclusive, open view to your stance today?
Well, when the boys were young, because we're a sort of a mixed marriage in that my husband's Australian, I'm American, we wanted to see what life was like as adults in America. So we moved over when the boys were, I think, 3 and 4. And Luke got a job at the GC, my husband. And when we first got there, we moved into an apartment building because we didn't have time to find a permanent place yet. And I had a neighbor who just was the most caring, kind person. Like we talk about the fruits of the spirit, she had them in spades. She came over. She's like, I know you probably haven't got your internet hooked up and you don't have any furniture here. I've printed off some local ads for used furniture for you. She was the president of a group called Parents at Home, and I was very much into like I'm going to stay at home and look after my kids. That's the right thing to do. And she I have to let you know, I'm not really good with my directions and spatial awareness and driving. I hate driving. Now, you imagine I come to Australia at the age of 19. The stick shift
Okay.
is the wrong hand. You're on the
Wrong
other
side of
side
the
of the
road.
other side of the car. And
Yeah.
so I just mucked everything up. And then I moved back to America. So I'm like translating in my brain 3 times.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just did not want to drive anywhere. And she was
Yeah.
inviting me to these parents at home social things. And I kept saying, "Oh, I'm not quite, comfortable." And she said, "Oh, I've got a huge, I think it's a suburban. There's room for all of you." And she was asking me every day to go out to these things. And so at the same time, I'm joining my local church. And because of how conservative I am, I'm not really meeting a lot of people or getting to know a lot of people. I'm a bit scared and anxious anyway as a person. And my fellow church members were strangers and not really warm or welcoming or offering any assistance. And then I have my neighbor who's just making contact with me every day, seeing how I am. And we got to be really, really good friends. And she knew that I was vegan, and she would and invite me over and make sure that there was food for me and my family. And we did a lot of stuff socially together. And of course, being the good Adventist that I am, that I was, I wanted to convert her because she's such a beautiful person, right? So I invited her to church, and she said, "Oh, I would love to come, but I just have one question for you. Is your church friendly to gay people?" And I said, "Well, I don't really know. I'll have to check that out for you. Probably not."
Yeah.
So I went to and I went to we had a female pastor at the church I was at, and asked her, "What's our stance?" And she said, "Love the that
Love the
trite
person,
saying."
not the sin kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, love the sinner, love the well, I can't remember even
Love
how it
you love the sinner, not the sin, or something like that. Yeah.
goes. Yeah, so basically,
Whatever.
we would love the person, but, they are
Yeah.
they're sinners, so, when I went back and told her that, she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, like, I'm atheist." I didn't even know. I assumed that she was Christian. How could someone be showing all these fruits of the Spirit and not be connected with God? Like, I
Mm.
told her, like, "I think that the Holy Spirit talks to you, um, because you behave in such a Christian way." And instead of being like, that's so condescending, instead of getting offended at me, she's like, "Oh, thank you so much. What a compliment." She's just such a gracious person. But that's the first time. Oh, she said, I can't join your church because my brother is gay and he's the most ethical person that I know. He's at that time, I don't think it was legal to be married. It was back in 2002 or three. And, has a partner. They're the best people I know, she said. And that just blew my mind, just that one sentence, because I didn't realize that that was possible, that you could be gay and ethical. Isn't that sad?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sad.
And you weren't
Um,
even teasing apart, being gay and, at this stage, even uh, the action of being gay. You were
no, no,
even just saying a gay person is a sinner.
I I didn't even know anything about orientation. Which I think people probably of my age might not have ever, if they're not challenged in that way, if they stay in their Adventist bubble and they work with Adventists and they go to church and they don't associate with people outside the church, or they don't associate with people inside the church who are in the closet,
Mm,
they
mm,
won't even know what would prompt them to start thinking outside of what they'd been taught. Like, to me, it was just I knew that this was true, and I'd never questioned it.
yeah. And what year were you chatting to this atheist lady?
Um,
What
it
time
would have
period is
been
that?
2002, 2003, because we came
Okay.
back to Australia in 2005.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So that's when I started to think, well, maybe I don't know the whole story.
Yeah.
Because if she says that her brother's ethical, I know he must be, because she is such a beautiful person. And I trust her to make the call on that. And just that in itself, thinking that an atheist was an ethical person, was mind blowing to me. So,
Yeah. So you got a double whammy there.
yeah,
You were
cognitive dissonance.
yeah, you were thinking, "Okay, now I've gotta kind of accept the atheist and the gay person. Is
Mm,
that possible? Would God
yeah,
judge?"
yeah, yeah, yeah. So at that stage, I was in the middle of a teaching degree, and I'll tell you what, I was thinking of not doing the teaching degree because I wanted to follow everything correctly. And you know that verse in 1 Timothy 2:12, I forbid a woman to teach or hold authority over a man. I was doing high school teaching. And to teach high school students, if you go by the Jewish age of being a man, that's 13, right? So, does God, I don't know, I was already questioning women's ordination and where I stood on it. I don't like conflict. So I was like, I'll just stay out of it. I don't feel called to be a minister. And there's my privilege again, So it didn't affect me. I didn't have to really think deeply about it at that stage. But when I did finally go back to study at Avondale, when we came back to Australia, I switched to a Bachelor of Arts in part because I was like, oh, I'm not sure if I should be a secondary teacher. And I wasn't interested in being a primary teacher. So I finished a Bachelor of Arts. And because I had that freedom and sort of this opening of my mind, I used my assignments in my degree as a way to study all the conservative things that I had started to question. So one of my assignments was a music tutorial about whether drums were really
Yeah.
detrimental to your soul. And another one was, there was a few. Oh, women, early Christian church fathers. That was for a history class. Early Christian heritage or something. And I looked at their views towards women and how that colors the way that we interpret the Bible and our attitudes towards women and whether they should be involved in church things. That's what it doesn't say about that verse. If we're taking a literal reading of the Bible, it's teaching. It doesn't say anything about pastors. So once you start applying that to a minister, you're already doing some interpreting. You're not keeping the literal sort of meaning if you were just to read it straight. So if we can rethink how that applies, surely we can do it with the rest of the Bible. Yeah, but then one of my
Mm.
assignments was about homosexuality. And that's when I first looked into it, and I became the most closeted of closeted affirming people because I didn't tell a soul. The only person that knew, I didn't even tell my husband. The only person that knew was the lecturer. And the lecturer actually, because she said you have to do both sides of the issue. So I covered the texts and the traditional Christian viewpoint, and then I covered the other side. And there was some beautiful affirming theology that I looked at as well, and that's in that like 2,500 word essay.
Mm. Mm.
um, all there. And the lecturer actually used that for a number of years afterwards, took my name off it as course material. So when I look into an issue, I like to do it thoroughly.
Yeah. It's like, I kind of sensed that even when we first met, that you were someone that did want things to be black and white, but that you also did research a topic thoroughly. So, for
Yeah.
example, when you said didn't want drums, I didn't feel it was just based on a whim. I felt like, yeah, this person's dug into that. I respect that.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I used to sing, and there was this one solo that I would do called "They Could Not" from Sandy Patty. I don't know if you remember it. It's
Yes,
an
I
old
do.
song, but it's got
Mm.
a huge range, and I just
Yeah,
loved singing it. It took a lot
yeah.
of skill and a lot of practice. And I had my father-in-law listen to it, and what he said afterward is, "It reminds me of being in the nightclub." And I was so
What?
taken aback.
And it was just a
It was
very
Sandy
laid back
Patty.
backing
It did
end
have
voice.
drums, and so part of that was, like, trying to be respectful to my elders as well and people of a different generation, but the thing that opened my eyes the most is when you and I were working together and you're like, "Okay, so we'll probably market this to 50 plus, age group," and I was like, "What?" Now I wouldn't mind because I'm so close to 50. But at the time, I was kinda sad.
And I think nowadays it's different, but for sadly, the church back then was kind of divided with styles of music, and there was an era of young people being really contemporary, and the older generation being very much wanting the more no
Yeah.
drums, no
I was
drums.
trying to be thoughtful, because if it did, because he did play the bass in a nightclub, and then he
Yeah.
came to God and joined the church and didn't want anything to do with that lifestyle. So I was trying to be anyway.
And the problem with all of that, like you said before, the cognitive dissonance, I think a bit of tension's good as you research something, looking at different sides,
Yeah,
opposing views. That's good. But cognitive dissonance often puts you in a place where you try and please everybody because you have to kind of agree with things you don't really agree with. And
yeah.
I can imagine that being a bit of an interesting and hurtful conversation
I've
with
wasted
your
too much of my
father-in-law.
life trying
Yes,
to make
just to
sure
please
everyone is
people.
happy.
Yeah, yeah.
I've given up on so many God-blessed pleasurable things
Yes, I know.
by trying to make everyone happy
Happy.
and, be thoughtful and
Um, yeah, and look, it's so liberating when you can just be yourself. And
Yeah,
and interesting, even that thing when I'd said this audience is probably an older audience. I wouldn't have even been thinking about your voice. I would have been thinking because it doesn't have drums.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Can I just divert for a moment because
yeah.
Stephen Beagles has written a quote which I thought interesting and yeah. He said, "I find it much easier to accept a gay atheist than a gay Christian.
Mm,
I'm not talking about orientation, but about lifestyle."
right,
And
and
and I mean, I find that very confusing. Actually, interesting that straight after that, Floyd Paynitz, hi Floyd.
yes,
Floyd also
lovely to
said
see
earlier,
you there,
"Hello from Texas,"
Floyd.
and Floyd was is the president of SDA Kinship and was the person that guided me through the becoming a member. And he's just written lifestyle, a trigger word for me that I don't understand. And there may even be a little conversation in the background here that we'll just
Yeah,
put up. Uh, Stephen kind of replies, "One of my best friends from the Adventist church came out to me as gay. I didn't not stop being his friend, but it was a bit of a shock to my system." And that's
mm,
fair enough. I mean, but I think what Stephen said earlier about easier to accept a gay Adventist than a gay Christian.
atheist, yeah,
Sorry, a gay atheist. Yeah, sorry,
yeah,
than a gay Christian. That'd be a conversation to dig into a little bit
yeah.
because um, I'm not even sure what the difference is in the lifestyle there. I guess I don't know.
Depend people are people, and you have
Yeah,
conservative gay people and liberal gay people, and
yeah,
they're just people.
yeah. So feel free to dig in a bit more there, Stephen, if you want. So back to some of these thoughts that you were conflicted over. It sounds like there was a period of time where you were talking about rock music, women's ordination,
Yeah,
homosexuality,
yeah,
your own place in the world, trying to please everybody.
yeah.
What was there a moment that you woke up one day? You know what? I'm not going to be I'm going to be my own person. Was there a defining moment, or is it something you look back on now that was a bit of a slow process?
I don't know whether I wanna share that moment with everyone because it's very personal, but I was I was trying to please someone, and they ended up not liking me at all, and I had been so
You've
focused
done all the right things.
and living my life, doing everything to make this person happy, and, it was just such a shock that it wasn't working, and I was like,
Mm,
"Well, I'm miserable." And you imagine a young mother with these conservative views. Like, I can't take my kids anywhere because people will give them sugar, they'll give them ice cream, they'll give them, or, they'll fill the mind with, evil ideas. So I'm at home, lonely, and up myself, thinking that I'm better than everyone because I'm keeping all these rules and being very faithful and suffering.
yeah,
Um, and I was miserable, and I was like, "Enough. If it doesn't even make the people I'm trying to make happy, I'm gonna make myself happy. I'm gonna explore these issues, and I'm going to work out what is really what, for myself, and just live that way. And the consequences will be whatever they are because I'm already, miserable."
yes,
And those weren't the consequences that I thought would come from the way that I was living.
yeah, yeah.
So,
And look, the interesting thing when you are your own person, I'm always surprised when people tell me something that they believe that's different to what I believe. That it just doesn't. I don't even think about why that would worry me. It doesn't even worry me in the slightest. But I've noticed when I share some things that I might believe and notice a reaction of, or maybe I don't like him anymore, or maybe I do like him, and that doesn't worry me in the slightest. But it's an interesting observation to note that at the end of the day, if you just yourself, the people that's like you anyway, regardless of what you believe, they stick by you, and
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
the people to live for. Your family, your friends that
yeah.
stick by you.
You end up spending the most time with the people that are the most like you, or
Yeah,
the mo
and
the most uplifting.
yeah, exactly. And like you said, how many years have you wasted
Mm.
living for other people that didn't end up caring for you anyway?
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
It's just to divert back to that little sub conversation Stephen wrote. Sorry, well, this is the beauty of live interaction conversation. Stephen's written back when I said I was a bit confused about the what he meant by the lifestyle, and he's bringing out the heavy artillery words here. By lifestyle, I mean sexual intimacy. I can get over two people living with each other and having a close friendship, but I cannot get over the sex part. Sorry. Don't apologize, Stephen. Look, ask anyone can
Mm.
ask what they want. We're talking about stuff here.
Yeah.
We're trying not to get offended or attack people. We're talking about ideas. So thank you, Stephen. I
Mm.
guess what I'm saying though is you mentioned earlier, Stephen, that you said it's easier to accept a gay atheist than a gay Christian, and I'm still not sure about that one. Like,
Mm.
isn't the gay atheist potentially having sexual intimacy and the gay Christian? Anyway, you might be able to unpack that a bit more. What are your thoughts on that, Tammy? Mm.
Um, I go back to something. This might be a bit sacrilegious, but Ricky Gervais, the comedian,
Yes, I love Ricky.
back when there was a lot of debate about same-sex marriage, I saw a stand-up routine that, and so crude. I mean, he's he's not some squeaky clean, but he made a logical point that really spoke volumes to me. He said, "I don't understand why people are happy that it's legal for someone to have 50 sexual partners in one night. And that's okay. Let them do that. But if they want to commit to one person and have a monogamous relationship, well, that's not okay." Like,
Yes,
what
yes.
is the logic in that?
I know. I
And
know.
I would have been one of those people. I would
Yeah.
have never thought through the logic of it. And
Yeah, it's interesting too because you're touching on the idea that when you had this kind of fixed view, um, a part of you was a bit condescending. So you're being condescending in a way. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm just tell me if this is what you were saying. You're being condescending in a way, but you're also at the same time you were feeling a bit of respect for that atheist lady and her.
oh,
So you've got this kind of I'm right, and but you're going, oh, but maybe I'm not, which is the cognitive dissonance that
yeah,
gets
that's right.
starting to grow.
The fear that we often live in when we're living that way, I thought, well, maybe she's been sent by the devil to test me, maybe she's a witch, maybe she which are
Mm,
all just ridiculous, ridiculous things. She was just a lovely, loving, caring person. And we're still Facebook friends. I see what she gets up to. And she's just a beautiful person. And she's atheist because she thinks it's more ethical to be an atheist than to be a
yeah,
Christian, which
yeah,
was, you know, another big, oh, wow. I thought
and
atheists were atheists, so they could do
that's
all these evil things that are heaps of fun.
yeah, and that's what Ricky Gervais was pointing to. I mean,
Yeah.
he's a very outspoken atheist, and
Oh, yeah. I
he's
forgot
got a
about
great
that.
show that's maybe a year or two ago called Afterlife. I think it's a couple of
Oh,
seasons.
yes, I've watched
I
that. Yeah.
highly recommend people watch that. It's such a good
Get
program.
your tissues because you'll cry.
It's yeah, it's emotional and hilarious,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
lots of gems in there. Like
yeah,
I like the idea of free thinking and people kind of landing on where they land for wherever
yeah.
they are in life using their own brain. Um, oh, hang on. We've got another one from Stephen that may
Mm,
illuminate this part of the conversation. He's saying an atheist does not claim to follow the Bible, while a Christian needs to be obedient to the will of God. It goes to one's interpretation of God's will. Oh, okay. I kind of get what you're saying now, Stephen. So what you're saying really is that the atheist you accept a bit more because they're not claiming to follow the Bible. The gay Christian is claiming to follow the Bible. And I guess what we're saying there, so that's for you personally, it's harder to accept. But for a lot of people that have looked at the clobber texts, are now realizing that maybe the Bible has not been saying those things all along anyway.
Hmm.
Is that a good intro into talking about some of the clobber texts? Is that something
Well,
you
I
wanted to
think
do today, or?
if you don't mind, I might continue sort of with the story, because the big um, block of research that I've done, it wasn't just that 2,500 word essay. After I got my Bachelor of Arts, I was the education secretary at the division for a while, and I was
Oh,
just
wow,
bored.
I didn't know that.
The
Oh,
like the receptionist, not
but you're
for
at
the
the
education
division.
department. Yeah, and I was just bored stiff. I thought I need a challenge. So I finally, by that stage, had decided it was okay for me to be a teacher. And I finished a Bachelor of Teaching. Um, and just as I finished that degree, Sydney Adventist College closed, and my boys by that time were in years 7 and 8 there. So I had work lined up to be a teacher in Sydney, in Wahroonga, but we moved to Koombong, so that the boys could go to Avondale instead of Sydney Adventist College because it had closed. So I ended up being in Koombong without any work. Nobody knew me. You sort of get hired based on people who know you well. And anybody that did know me knew me as this really ultra conservative person anyway. So I was kind of a different person. And yeah, I just needed to get myself established. And so I did relief teaching, and that was boring me because there's not a lot of planning, or, once you're done, you're done, and not a lot of work. There's a teacher shortage now, but at the time, there wasn't a lot of jobs going around. So I decided to do a master's in education to sort of further my career along in a quick way. And I decided to look further into the official title of my research topic was Teacher Attitudes to Sexual Minority Students in Adventist High Schools. So I spent 2 years part-time reading and reading and reading and reading and reading, and came up with this 20,000 word literature review in preparation for doing some research, gathering information, and doing my own exploration into teacher attitudes, and basically wanting to look at the welfare of Adventist high school students, which is the reason why I brought it up when we were talking about Stephen's sort of um, problem with gay people and the Bible and all of that, is that, and what I discovered, the first thing, and I think this is a good place to start with what I learned, is that there are kids in our church who don't have a choice. They are gay, that's who they are, and they're Adventist, that's who they are. And those two things are often can be at odds. And they can be ethical people, like my friend in America, very, very wanting to do the right thing, and horrified when they finally discover um, who they are, and the trauma that can happen if they're not supported, if they have to remain secret, if they're praying, they're desperate to not be who they are because they love God, they love their church, they love their pastor, they love their parents, they love their family, they want to be a good person, and they probably are. The fact that they're struggling so hard with this, it means that they want to be a good person, but the other part of who they are, it is not correctly understood
Yeah,
by the rest of the people they spend their whole lives with.
yeah. That's the saddest part, isn't it? That
Yeah,
these kids, while
very
everyone else is
confronting.
debating whether they're allies or whether they're this or that,
Yeah,
it's the kids in the middle and that's why I've really been wanting to drill into the topic during this series, because it's those kids that I think need to know that people are allies, and they can, like,
yeah,
someone might watch this and they go, I just feel that I feel so good to hear what Tammy is saying, and they might contact you. It just gives people a chance to know that they're not alone, that it's not crazy, it's
yeah,
not stupid, and there are people there that support them, because the truth is there are people literally killing themselves because they
Yeah,
cannot cope with this confusion in their mind.
yeah, yeah.
And
They
that's
pray and
tragic.
they yeah, and when it doesn't work, when all these promises that are made to them, oh, you can change, God's power will help you, they think, well, God must hate me
Because I'm not
because
changing.
he can move mountains.
Yeah.
He can change me if he wants to. When he hasn't, he must hate me. And
Yeah.
they can't tell anyone about it because they're ashamed.
Yeah.
And it's just, huh,
Well,
I get really emotional.
I can understand. I do too. And I just think, what a trap. What a trap for them. They can't
Growing
speak
up,
about it
one,
because they'll get judged. They
yeah,
feel shamed. They're
yeah.
being told that they can change. One of the big things I'd love to tap into a little bit later or dig down on is this false hope within Adventism.
Mm.
I just feel like the church leaders, a lot of the pastors, who I'm not calling out the pastors to have to speak up, but those who can, I wish they would, because
Well, I'm in that
they're
same
they're
boat
the they're the sheep. I
because,
mean, they're the pastoral care shepherds of the
yeah,
sheep. And if imagine the poor young person that feels like I've got no one I can really talk to. I remember it's interesting just watching. I'm just looking at some of the comments, and it's great to see Floyd Paynet's here watching the interview. And I remember interviewing him, and when he said that his mother said something along the lines of, when he told her he was gay, that she said,
yeah,
"That's okay, but don't tell anyone."
yeah,
And that's
yeah.
what I feel like some of the pastors that are supportive of the gay community, and they might not agree with everything, but you can still come out as an ally. None of them will come on the program and say they are allies. And to me, that's like, but behind the scene, they're getting all the calls from, and they're being a good supporter. But in essence, they're saying, but just don't tell anyone I'm supporting you.
That's exactly my story, though, Peter. When I
Well,
did
that's
that
why I'd
essay,
love to chat more
and
about that
the
with
and
you.
the lecturer said, "Oh, I'd love to share what you've written with my class," and I said, "Well, don't put my name on it." Um,
Yeah.
and then when you started doing your interviews about this topic, and I sent you my
Yeah.
research, my 20,000 word thing, and I said, "Oh,
Very
here's some
good.
really good
Very
stuff you
good.
can use." And you're like, "Well, why don't you just come on the show?" I'm like, "Oh, I could never do that." And when Arden came on and I watched her interview,
Yeah.
I was just inspired by her because she gave her definition of what an ally is.
Yes.
And I thought, and I think the description I gave you is false because I thought I was an ally. But in reality, by her definition, I was a bystander. And the worst thing about that was
Wow.
I was a knowledgeable bystander. I
Wow.
knew my stuff inside and out, and yet I was not stepping forward and saying
This
something.
is
In
amazing.
my private conversations with friends, with safe people, and I would do a little niggle here and a little niggle there, and their family members that I have that have completely changed their views on it because I've, worn them down
Yeah.
with my attitude and my passion. I think I'm still pretty uh, condescending, even with all the things that because I know what's right, right? I need to keep reminding myself there's more to learn, more to learn, more to learn.
Well, but what's amazing, and I kind of didn't really know that. I did, but I didn't quite twig to it. So I wasn't trying to push you into the conversation, but it's only dawned on me how big this is today for you to actually be publicly s supporting. Is that right?
Well, I will tell you there have been for me nothing but positives since I've started to be like I put my toe in the water by just being supportive with the comments, here and there, and then getting more and more vocal when I could, because there's a few interviews I haven't watched or haven't sort of interacted with, and then I got more and more vocal about what I thought and what I believed, and I'm like, oh, and then I looked at the member list to see who might possibly be reading what I'm saying, and but when I decided, yes, I will come on the show, I had conversations with administrators, Adventist and outside of the church, and they were all surprised that I was worried. And a lot of them are like, well, we believe the same thing. And there's actually policies that are being written. There's PDs that are happening, professional developments, where experts are coming into the schools and explaining, how we can best support our rainbow students.
Into the
So
Adventist schools.
yes, yes.
Wow.
So I was quite surprised and ashamed that I was so worried for so long. There may still be some blowback, but I feel so much better about myself,
Yeah.
and um, I feel like maybe I can do some good. It's no longer stopping me from
Yeah.
speaking out. So,
And look, I think it's very admirable of you and brave and courageous and good on you. I'm
well, the people that
proud
are the
to know you.
bravest, the people that are the bravest are the people who have, like, I can't stress enough. This is a position of privilege I come from, and the people that don't have a choice, that's who they are. Those are the brave people.
Yeah.
The
It's
warriors who are still alive after all of this, who have gone through it all.
yeah. There's all different levels and kinds of bravery, but I
Yeah.
think it's important to highlight the nature of your courage in doing this, not to in any way
It makes me
elevate
uncomfortable.
you. I don't want to I'm not elevating you, but I'm encouraging others
Yeah.
to also be courageous and see that it is possible to do because we're just
Yeah.
everyday people. And it's the everyday people, um, in many ways, you could say, well, maybe it's not brave and not courageous. It's just what you should be doing.
Yeah. But
And
but again, like, I'm not a contentious person. Like, you do what you can do, and that's what you can do. I would never
exactly.
try and force anyone
Yeah, exactly.
to
I
do
guess what
anything that
I'm
they're
saying, though, is
uncomfortable with.
that if I could say, like, if there were maybe 20% of Adventist pastors speaking up and coming onto my platform and other social media platforms, then you'd go, "Oh, good." But there's no one will say yes. And I'll get people behind the scenes saying, "I'd love to, but I can't. I'll lose my job," or that kind of thing. So
Yeah. Yeah.
if the number if that's not even a number, if it wasn't 0, then I wouldn't be kind of calling out. But of course, the other side of it is, yeah, be your own person. If you don't want to, I'm not judging people that don't come on the
Yeah.
program and
Yeah.
speak out,
I
but
would have to judge myself.
I'm just observing that there's 0 people,
Mm.
and so maybe you'll help kind of create a bit of a movement of, and particularly church employees that are struggling with that. Um, you know, so there's some nice comments there. Someone's written, "Thanks, Tammy. I'm
Mm.
looking forward to listening to the whole interview." And Floyd has written, "Please, everyone, join Tammy and us. It saves lives."
And actually, my research actually shows that it does.
Interesting.
There are studies. Yeah. I I'd love to dive into it, and I just wanted to sort of explain the rest of the story. So,
Yeah.
I got a full-time job in the middle of doing this master's degree, and then there was some personal family trauma, which I can't go into because it's private, and the members of my family deserve to have privacy. But um, it 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 has been a really traumatic about 6 years. We're all fine now, but I had to switch my focus and let the master's degree go, which was sad. But for me and my journey and my family and my professional life, I switched focus to special education. So I ended up getting a master's in special education rather than this topic. But the I think the things that I learned are very valuable. And there's quite a few studies and quite a few issues I'd love to talk about if we have time.
Yes, that's one of the big reasons I wanted you to be on the program.
Yeah.
We'll just do one more comment from Stephen because I think it's a very important point he's raised. How many homosexuals How how have homosexuals been treated by the church since the earliest days of the apostles? Well, since the earliest days of the apostles, they weren't called homosexuals. That's only since the late 1940s, I think, that term knowledge has been used. However, I would say that they've possibly been marginalized, treated not so well
Yeah.
since those times
I mean,
throughout Christendom.
the very language of the Bible, it
Yeah,
shows you how they've been treated because the way that those very few verses have been interpreted.
yeah, yeah. Okay, well, look, let's dig into some of these points that you've studied and raised.
So I've got my lit review here, and I've got things highlighted because I obviously can't go through all of it. So hopefully it will make sense with
Is
me
it
pulling.
is it a document that people could request and
I
read?
suppose. I mean, nobody owns it because I never finished. I don't really know what the legalities are of that.
Yeah,
Maybe I should check with the
yeah,
institution
maybe
first.
check with that, and then people can
It's
reach out to you on Facebook. I'll put
it's
your link there.
it's incomplete because oh, this is when I did this study. This is when I learned about kinship because when I did my first essay, I had no idea that there were actually Adventists struggling with it. I knew the rest of the world and stuff, but then when I did my study, I bought this book because I thought, is that turning up
Oh, yeah, no,
backwards?
that's right. Christianity and
Yeah,
homosexuality.
yeah, and
Who's that
that's
by?
where. Sorry.
Who's that by?
There are a lot of different authors.
Oh,
There's
okay.
part one, two, three, four, but it's edited by David Ferguson, Fritz Guy, and David Larson.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah.
Fritz
So,
Guy.
sorry.
Fritz Guy. Yeah,
Oh,
he a famous Adventist scholar and theologian and
there you
academic.
go. Yeah, it's really well done, well written book, and I reference it a bit in my lit review. And that there's a lot of positive theology in there. However, then this book came out, which is, I think, the church's response to that book, and that's Homosexuality, Marriage, and the Church: Biblical Counseling and Religious Liberty Issues. Um, Gain, Miller, and Swanson, it says on the side, but it's basically just a bunch of Adventist theologians talking. So if I were to share this lit review with people, it has sort of the theological responses to the positive gay theology from the first book, and they're really negative, really hurtful. And I don't have the positive theology in there because Alicia's book needs to come out. I'm guessing that might be then the further response, because in the church's book, I think it is the I think I'm safe to say that that's the church's book. And
Who's the
my
publisher?
publisher is, oh, let me have a look. Andrews University Press. So definitely the church's book.
Yeah.
Oh, I've forgotten what I was saying now. The the links that the theologians went to make sure that people understand that it's not okay to be accepting. Before we had just those 6 verses, but then the theology in this book, they've got sola scripture, tota scriptura, allegoria scripture, the harmony of scripture, imago Dei, the image of God, the theology of marriage. They just doctrine after doctrine after doctrine why it's not okay to be accepting a 3 angels message. There's even a section in there about how it's not good for the 3. And so I'm really looking forward to Alicia's book,
Wow.
because I feel like it's, and I'm not a theologian, I feel like it's theological gymnastics. I really do, because the theology in this book is quite not simple, but it's logical. But anyway, I wouldn't want to share this with someone and then have
Right.
them just be, because in my conclusion, when I finished my research, I was going to put the positive theology to sort of
Yeah.
counter it. So and I don't even want to talk about the theology really today. I want to just talk about
Yes.
well-being, the well-being of the students that I was hoping to be
Yes.
able to inspire policy for. And I'm really happy that that's happening anyway.
Yes.
I'm really sad that all this study, it's just been sitting there because I've been afraid to speak out. And I tried to
Ma-
get you to use it.
Yes. Well, maybe it's something you can just complete a little bit down the track and
Yeah,
make
it's just,
available in a book form or something on Kindle.
oh, it's not big enough to be a book. But yeah, just the struggles. And I have to say, having my husband as a support through the family struggles that we've been through, which is why I couldn't do anything really with this. I mean, imagine telling someone they can't have that. They're not allowed, or they don't go to heaven.
I know.
And I was going to say, when I was a little girl, my dad was sick and my mum worked and she studied. So I felt alone a lot, and I wanted attention. So then when I would go to try and make friends, I would bug them for attention. So I wasn't really socially um, competent.
Mm.
And I was a sad little girl. And I remember
Oh.
sitting on the swings, being sad and crying and saying, God, I just need you to hug me. I just need a hug. I think I was in third grade. And I felt supernatural comfort.
Okay.
And those two things, God and my husband, they're my pillars. And I don't know how people survive without those two things. And we as a church are trying to pull those things away from people.
Mm.
It's just, it doesn't seem, it doesn't seem productive.
Yeah.
It
It
doesn't seem
doesn't
fair.
seem virtuous at all.
No, ethical.
Yeah.
So I start the lit review off with there's about 31 studies, and I've read them all, that say that the more religious someone is, the more negative their views are towards um, homosexual people or gay people. Or I apologize if I'm not using the right terminology, because again, that's my position of privilege. I haven't had to work all that out in as much detail as I probably should have. And then there's another great number of articles at 21 that I've cited that say that knowing an LGBTQI plus person is what mitigates negative um, attitudes towards homosexual people.
Can you
So,
say that again?
knowing someone who's gay
Yeah.
changes how we think about
About
the
them.
issue.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And there's studies people have done, at least 21 that I have cited, that all agree that if you know someone, you're going to change your perspective on the issue.
Yeah.
I agree. My husband is a legend. I love him.
Yes.
Somebody commented.
Yes, I saw that pop up.
Oh, in the last 5 years, he has just upheld us. If there's a crisis,
Yeah.
he's the person to call. I would
Yeah.
not have
He's a
coped.
very stable guy. I remember when we did the recording, just kind of we keep talking a bit about that, but I remember him coming in on one of the first meetings, and I instantly felt that, and I, 'cause I knew him, his family already, and I was impressed that he's very stable,
Hmm.
a solid person, and he was sussing out the scene. Peter Dixon, bit of long hair, playing rock music. Is this where we want to be? I wasn't offended by that vibe at all. I respected it because he was showing his love for you,
Hmm.
um, in a way that was just very solid and stable. So I can hear what you're saying is it matches with what my experience of knowing him as well.
Well, he has very high opinion of you, Peter. So
Oh, that's nice
it's
to know.
mutual.
Mutual, yeah.
And then I move on to talk about how we have Adventists, SDA kids who are also gay. That exists, and I've got examples. I've got quotes from this book, and other studies that I found, peer-reviewed journal articles and stuff. Don't really need to go into those, but I can if you know.
Yeah, I think
Or
it's
you could
important.
watch. I also cite Seventh Gay Adventists, the video,
Yeah,
the
that's a good
movie.
video. Yeah,
Found that really moving and
yeah,
just so informative,
yeah,
because this is all theoretical. Like, nobody's ever come out to me. I don't have any friends that I know of. And I think it's because of the way I presented myself, very conservative, very black and white. And I was very quiet about what I'd learned. So, yeah.
yeah. No, dig into those things. I think that's why we're here.
And then I go into sexual identity and what that is. But um, I go into the tension between a person's sexual identity and their spiritual identity, and how when you are a Christian, not necessarily Seventh Day Adventist, but any sort of conservative denomination, those two things are at odds with each other. Either one grows or the other grows, and it's very difficult to grow both. And so I've just got highlighted some of the negative things that can happen if you have poor sexual identity development. And that's been linked to compulsive eating, compulsive spending, compulsive sexual activity. It's been linked to alcohol abuse and over separation and over attachment disorders. So the very behavior that we assume is happening within the gay community could be happening because we don't allow them to develop their
Yeah.
sexual identity in a healthy way.
Yeah.
And that was an eye opener for me.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? And then people are judging that behavior,
Yeah.
which indirectly they've caused, as being indicative of the person's natural behavior.
Yeah, which
Very
if they
unfair.
were allowed to grow in a healthy way in a very protective environment,
Yeah. Yeah.
where they're being told that risky behavior is not good and it harms your spirituality, and they want to be monogamous, and they want to honor God with their bodies, and take that protective environment away, and I mean, what do you expect?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
um, there's
Yeah.
another.
Exactly.
Sorry.
No, I just said exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. There's another survey of 86 participants found that the higher sexual identity formation was associated with better self-concepts, emotional stability. A more recent study with 197 sexual minority persons found that a positive sexual identity was linked with better mental health, even after controlling for sexual orientation, age, race, and sex. So, not necessarily a gay person, but any person who has a really well-developed sexual identity, there are positives to that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, boy, that opens up a whole other interview in my head there. But let's keep going with the.
Yeah, and we might run out of time. I don't know. I tend to
No,
talk and talk and talk.
no, it's good.
Um, and then I've just highlighted this quote, and it will be from the Christianity and Homosexuality book. At a very early age, I started praying earnestly to God that he would not allow me to be gay. I didn't want to be gay. Who in their right mind would choose to totally ignore what is considered normal attractions, the norms of society? Who would want to face the consequences of such a decision? To be ridiculed, to be discriminated against, to be called a child molester, a sicko, and a freak, to be made fun of, to have to live in fear for your personal safety, your life. Who chooses to put themselves into such horrible circumstances? Well, not I. I wished I could have a girlfriend, to be good at sports, and to be one of the guys. Just so many powerful testimonies within that book that I would never even have considered existed 30 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. It's good that some of the TV shows that are out at the moment, or on Netflix or wherever they are addressing some of these issues in a way that reaches young people. So
Yeah.
they're not the type of typical LGBT comedy show or rom com or some. They're more of the sitcoms. For example, I'm thinking of one called Family Reunion, and
Oh, I haven't
people
seen
might
that.
want to look that up on Netflix. And they just touch on these kind of issues, a lot of the social issues that we face today. And my girls love it, and they're
Wow.
only 7 and 9,
Yeah.
and it's very kid focused, but lots of humor in there for adults as well. Um, so I'm just suggesting that if there are people out there with kids, it might be a good show to watch that
You'll
just
have to put a link
casually,
in.
yeah, just casually introduces the idea of accepting all people,
Mm.
and yeah. Sorry, I'm interrupting a bit too
No,
much
that's
today.
okay. Um, and then I go on to talk about how people sometimes link sexual minority people, and I use that term in the lit review because I'm using it constantly, and it was a softer way to talk about it. But they often link it with pedophilia, which is not warranted. Sexual orientation describes attractions and behavior between consenting adults. Pedophilia, on the other hand, describes actions and behaviors concerning children. It's a disorder and a crime. In fact, the majority of child abusers are heterosexual men, even in the case of same-sex child abuse. Dan Villa, in his book Homosexuality in the Bible, Two Views, cited studies that claim there is no significant difference between homosexual and heterosexual persons in regards to psychological health, criminality, dependability, or social responsibility. This implies that homosexuality in itself is not pathological. It also suggests that homosexual practice need not injure or deform the hearts of those involved.
Mm.
And there really isn't any connection. They're different issues.
Yeah.
If we want to talk about pedophilia, well, let's talk about that, but it has nothing to do with what we're talking about right now.
Yeah. A very good, a very good friend of mine lost his job at an Adventist school a long time ago. So it's not something people
Mm.
need to dig into of recent times. And he was told behind the scenes that because he was more openly gay, even though he hadn't come out as gay,
Mm.
that he couldn't be employed there anymore because people might interpret having a gay man at a Adventist primary school as having pedophilia tendencies,
Mm.
and that just ruptured
It,
him. You know,
it's insulting.
it's
It's
very insulting.
it's the biggest insult you could give someone.
It's insane. They lost a great teacher.
Yeah, that's the thing. Oh, there's so many resources that are wasted.
Yeah, yeah,
Things to offer the world, things to offer our church.
yes,
I often find that people that go through trauma and come out the other end, triumph, overcome, become a stronger person, they have so much to offer the world.
yeah,
And
yeah.
they're so nice to be around. They're the
Yeah,
people you want around you when you're going through tough
exactly.
times.
Yeah, yeah,
And so when people talk about the nature of these people, I'm like, oh, you'd love them. They would be so supportive. They would be
yeah,
so
yeah,
loving and
yeah.
accepting.
What a loss the Adventist Church has with women at high level leadership,
Yeah.
accepting gay LGBTQI plus at any kind of church level.
Yeah.
Even just the right person for the job, men that just aren't ordained, for example. There are many men in the church that would make great leaders, but they
Yeah.
can't because they're not part of the boys' club of the ordained male network. It's just a loss. That's all I'm lamenting. What a loss to the
Yeah.
church. Hundreds and thousands of people. Anyway,
I'm just having a look at the next thing I've
yeah,
highlighted it to see how it ties into what we're talking about. Um, so the argument that I'm making around about where I've talked about the things we just talked about is that we were talking about sexual identity and when it happens, and it's usually sort of around puberty, 12, 13. I mean, people have different experiences, but a lot of the research says that's about the time when people start realizing, oh, there's something different about me. I'm not the same as my peers, and that's when they go to high school. And so that's why it was important for my study, because my study was about high school students. And so this quote that I've got highlighted is, this is the stage where one might come out to his or her friends or family. And interestingly, a study found that sexual minorities who reported higher levels of sexual identity development are also reported living in less repressive environments than participants with lower levels of sexual identity development. Yeah, so that makes sense. Of course, that's what we've been talking about,
yeah,
and that's
yeah,
underneath that heading where I'm talking about sexual identity.
yeah,
And there are a lot of studies that I looked at that showed that people who know who they are, they know that they're gay, they still want to go to Christian universities or Christian high schools because they want to develop their spiritual identity. They are spiritual
yeah,
people, they
yeah,
love God, and they choose to be there because they want that a connection, that nourishment. And so we will have people among us that are having to be quiet and hide who they are, but they're there on purpose to. And wouldn't it be lovely if we could all just be ourselves
yeah,
and minister together openly and honestly? Um, so the and I don't want to, like, my experience is different. and I might be assuming things that aren't true because it's all theoretical, like I said. But those people that are there are in the double bind because they can't, to be an ethical person, they can't have sex outside of marriage, but they're not allowed to get married.
Mm.
So we're emphasizing, you must be pure,
Yeah.
and they're not allowed to do the thing that would help with that.
That's what annoys me when people say, "Well, even heterosexuals don't have affairs," and that's just they equate it with that. Yeah, well, they might not have an affair, and they might have to be disciplined not to have an affair, and that's wrong, etc. But they at least get intimacy of a physical nature, whereas the gay person, LG, they get they have to just abandon all intimacy.
If they want
Because
to,
they want to toe the line with these
yeah,
advanced
yeah.
policies. I mean, that's a
Um,
fascinating one, that one.
yeah. So they often struggle. I'm citing a study here, Stratton and colleagues, 2013, highlight that the struggle in their study of the 247 sexual minority undergraduates at 19 Christian schools, they point out that both sexual identity and spiritual identity are important aspects of identity formation, but often on Christian campuses, the two create a polarizing of these issues for sexual minority students, with sexual core values anchoring one extreme and religious spiritual core values anchoring the other. And in that study, people who experienced the most amount of same sex attraction were the least likely to be religious. Um, but oftentimes they're there because they want to foster their spiritual identity. I'm just skim reading because I
Yeah,
can't
that's
cover it
good.
all.
No, that's good.
um, And if they feel like they have to abandon Christianity, it means that they'll lose a sense of meaning and purpose. Yet keeping their
Mm,
religion will mean that they face the prospect of damnation.
yeah,
Can you imagine having to make that choice?
yeah, yeah. So many things
Many
going
people feel,
against them. Just
yeah,
add to that just normal growing up.
that's right. I mean, life is traumatic enough. Many people feel the need to leave the church in order to fully realize their sexual identity, a state of being that leaves them stigmatized as an apostate. And the people in this study described feelings of self-loathing, being isolated, abused, ostracized by families, teachers, peers, neighbors, and their preachers.
While you're just looking there, someone has put a link up for that book you mentioned earlier. Um,
Yeah, that's great. If
for a
you are
copy of
looking for information,
yeah,
there are
copy
two
of
great places to look: the movie and the book.
So the book there is for a copy of Christianity and Homosexuality, Some SDA Perspectives. You can order it from Kinship. It's good to support them as well. And is the Seventh Day Adventist, is that a free, people can watch that for free? I think that's
I
the link
believe
there.
so. I actually purchased it when I was doing my study, but I think it's free now.
My wife went along to the screening of it here in when it was screened here in Cooranbong,
Hmm.
and she's unaware of the church's stance on things and didn't even know because she's not an Adventist, had only ever heard of Adventists when she met me, and she took Ruby along, little cute. I think she would have been 2 maybe then or 3, in a beautiful rainbow T-shirt, and
Oh,
she got so much flack over it, and she couldn't understand. She said, "Why are people sending nasty comments on my Facebook wall because I've put a picture of Ruby in a rainbow T-shirt showing my alliance and
yeah.
support of the gay community?"
We can see when people link gay people with pedophilia, then of course they don't want to see children involved in the topic at all.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
in reality, there might be some of the safest people to be
yeah,
around because they know what life is like, what trauma is like, what it's like to be a child who's hurting.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all her non-Adventist friends saw the comments. Everyone from Mother's Group saw the comments, and they were all like, "We'd never become an Adventist."
Hmm. Yeah.
Things I
Um,
wouldn't have heard when I was an Adventist because they wouldn't have told me to my face. I hear all this stuff now that I'm not an Adventist anymore. People will say
Yeah,
some of the things
yeah.
they would
They don't want to
never have
offend you.
said.
It's really sweet, isn't it? They don't want to
Yeah,
offend you.
yeah. Whereas now they'll go, "Oh, I'd never
Using a
become an
life that
Adventist,"
offends them.
which is
Yeah.
sad, like, you'd think even just from a pure public relations point of view, the church should be wanting to somehow have some kind of public policy that was a bit more
It might come
inclusive, you know?
it might come to a head. I mean, there are people that are leaving. My brother actually is one of those ethical atheists. He left the church. And
Mm,
back when we started the interview and the time of my life, I thought, oh, poor misguided brother, leaving the church.
yeah. Now you're thinking, "Good on you."
No, not necessarily, because in 2015, if he was a member of the church and all of the people like him had stayed, they possibly could have been delegates and they possibly could have voted
Yeah,
differently
yeah, and I
on women's
mean I
ordination.
mean I mean positive, not that he left in that respect, I mean
Yeah,
positive that
but
he's
that he's
using his
trying to
own
be an ethical
brain. He's
person.
making his own decisions, yeah.
Yeah, he's trying to
Just
be an ethical person.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Something that I think is really important that I haven't heard anybody talk about yet. Um, and if you have different thoughts on this than myself, feel free, because like I said, it's all theoretical to me. But there was a study that I read that talks about, let me see if I can find it, I've written it somewhere, post-conventional religious reasoning. And that's when within sexual identity formation, if you are same-sex attracted, at some stage you'll start questioning the things that you've always been told. Either that, or you'll just be devastated, because if you believe it all, then you're an abomination, which I think that would be very difficult to live with. So you start questioning everything, and possibly looking for positive theology, and making up your own mind as to how God feels about you and what God's all about. And this researcher calls it post-conventional religious reasoning. And the study that I found the most interesting is that if you leave the church, they found that if you haven't gone through that process, you will still have a high level of internalized homophobia within your own life. And I've got later on the dangers mentally and health-wise of internalized homophobia. So even if you leave the church to get away from it all, if you never challenge those early theological sort of things that you've learned, you'll have a higher level of internalized homophobia.
Wow.
And I'm skipping the big theology section of the of the lit review. Although I did want to, I don't know whether I should. There's one quote that just really offended me in there after reading all the different things that were said and the theological gymnastics that were going on. A feeling of revulsion for homosexual practice is no more a mark of homophobia than is a feeling of revulsion for incest a sign of incestophobia. People should feel revulsion for the intercourse of this type as a means of discouraging social incentives for such behavior. Too often, Christians are misled into thinking that they must lower the gravity of an offense in their own minds in order to love those who commit such offenses. Such thinking should be reversed. It is precisely because of those participating in severe offenses are most at risk of not inheriting God's kingdom that a loving outreach is more necessary. I can't think of anything that's less loving than that quote.
Yeah.
And that's from the church's
The
response.
church's response.
That's a theologian, an Adventist
Yeah,
theologian.
yeah.
I
See, it's
mean,
interesting that the other book, the one we're saying, the good book, um, that 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 was mentioned earlier, that is written by scholars and theologians as well, but
that's right,
obviously
exactly.
independently. Yeah.
And that's another thing. When I was at home alone, lonely, ultra conservative, I invited the Jehovah's Witnesses in because I was that lonely. And they studied with me for months and months and months. And we finally got up to like Revelation and, hell. Is it eternal or is it? And I thought, I've got them. I know my stuff, because I research. I had all my quotes and my Adventist theologian stuff ready, right, to counter their arguments. And when we got to it, oh, she's a beautiful, lovely lady. She said, well, our theologians interpret this Greek word in this way. And there's no argument to that. because I'm not a theologian, she's not a theologian. So basically, in order to be saved, you have to decide which theology major to believe.
Yeah.
And can our salvation be based on who we decide to trust when it
Yeah.
comes to that?
Yeah.
Surely not. That can't be a salvation issue. It can't be. I mean, what if you grow up in the wrong church and believe they're theologians instead of the right ones?
Yeah.
And it flies in the face of what we've been taught as Adventists since we were little, that we read the Bible and the Bible alone, and that's all we need. Well, no,
Yeah.
because if you read the Bible and the Bible alone, I can't be a teacher. It doesn't say anything about being a pastor. I could be a pastor,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I can't be a teacher because the verse says, I forbid a woman to teach or hold authority over, although pastors teach. That makes sense. But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Like if you went the Bible alone, you wouldn't be able to prove the investigative judgment either.
And
So
you, Peter, would have really long sides of your beard
that's
because
right.
it says
Over
you're
here,
not allowed to
got
shave
the back.
the corners of your beard. And I wouldn't be allowed to be wearing this lovely T-shirt with a heart on it. That's a heart,
It's
by the
hard.
way, because I'm pretty sure it's mixed um, materials, which
Of
is also.
course. Yeah. Yeah. I
But
can't wait till you do a lot of research on the investigative judgment and we have a good conversation about that one day.
yeah,
That'll be a
yeah.
really interesting one.
Anyway, um,
Continue. This is great.
there was another study. So I'm skipped over the theology section. I'm skipping over Christian perceptions because we already have talked about that, and we know just based on my own testimony what Christian perspectives can be, and up to the section on celibacy. Because that's the answer. That's the pin. Well, we'll love them and they're people and it's an orientation. Okay, that's fine. But like an alcoholic, let's get rid of the alcohol and improve their lives and save them. But there's the logical problem. Get rid of the intimacy, the partner, the life, the support. Does that make your life better? I don't think it would. So it's not a parallel, a metaphor that you can really that rings true to my mind and to my way of thinking, and from the research that I've done. So there was a study with 257 participants from a college in California associated with the SDA Church that shows that fundamentalism was positively associated with negative attitudes. Makes sense. The interesting thing about this study was that it specified different categories of sexual minorities. One would think, having reviewed the theological positions of the SDA Church, that if a sexual minority was celibate, the negative attitudes would disappear. But this study found that there was less tolerance for celibate sexual minorities than for liars, overeaters, alcohol abusers, and racists. The conclusion of the study was that, like a pair of dirty sunglasses you can't take off or clean, Christian fundamentalist theology obscures and distorts attitudes about homosexuality. I thought that was a powerful sort of
That is
quote.
powerful. That reflects a little bit of what Stephen Beagles, who wrote earlier, has just written. I think taps in a little bit to what we were just talking about then. I can see that this may not be a salvation issue, but I think it is a moral one. So even with the concession that you're talking about there, people will still see it through some kind of a lens that will find something to
Hmm.
to to still say it's less than.
When I was talking with my lecturer about the essay that I had done, they said, I think a lot of people don't like to allow the possibility that intimate acts are okay because it's icky.
Yeah, like
And
heterosexuals aren't having conversations like this. I've
no,
never done an interview about let's okay,
yeah,
we're
but
gonna do an
just
episode of
the thought.
heterosexual bedtime behavior. It's just
Yeah,
like
and usually I don't like to talk about those things either.
I know, I
You know,
know. So it feels just embarrassing to even have to
and
talk about it.
it's not really fair that every second question somebody has for someone once they finally know someone that's gay is, oh, sex this and sex that, and that, what an invasion of
Yeah,
privacy. What
yeah,
that they're just people. Why would we ask them what they get up
yeah,
to in their own private lives? And because it's icky is not a good reason to say, well, you're not allowed to do that.
yeah.
I think God will exclude you from heaven if you do that because it's icky.
Yeah. It interests me, and this is a whole other topic that I haven't really thought through. Part of my brain is saying shut up. But um, I think we're wired in certain ways that the same way you cannot pray the gay away, you can't pray the heterosexual away too. I think
No, that's right.
if, for
I mean,
example,
you could
being a
try.
man, if there's a heterosexual male myself, and I would say, well, I'd rather be in a gay relationship, and I'd rather be involved with gay intimacy because I think that would be a better lifestyle for me, and would
It doesn't
remove
happen.
some obstacles. There's no way I could do that.
Mm,
That's not meaning. It's just a tough one to explain, but something's
mm.
wired within me, like something's wired within the gay person,
Yeah,
to not be able to cross a line there, to not move that mountain, if that makes sense. And I
yeah,
think why I kind of hesitate saying that, I think that to the thinking person, just think about that and think about what that extrapolates to, and that becomes a whole interesting conversation we'll have another time. But
yeah,
um, yeah, I think we've got to be careful claiming the malleability of this attraction kind of thing. Um,
yeah. Um,
it's quite innate, is what I'm saying.
since we are talking about celibacy, I think because it's in the personal well-being section, there are some negative things about trying to live. And it's a thing that the Bible says we shouldn't do. We shouldn't make people be celibate. You know, better to
Yeah.
marry than burn. Some people can't take on this, what I take on, you know, Paul says. So it's actually not theologically correct to require someone to live a celibate life. Um, oh, it's because it's in the section on change therapy, I think, which I got tons of stuff about. Um, yeah, here's the negatives of celibacy. Um, pardon me for reading my own. I work better, I think, in written form than
No,
verbally anyway.
no,
Um,
you be you.
a celibate life can be problematic, as seen in Bell and Weinberg's study, which found that asexuals had the highest incident of suicidal thought, high rates of therapeutic counseling, and this is just asexuals. It's not like gay people, it's anybody who's not having sex. High rates of therapeutic counseling, considerable difficulty in simply coping with life, and were relatively isolated from others. Celibacy can also increase personal breakdowns and loneliness, cause periodic lapses of promiscuous and risky sex, which in turn creates spiritual damage and degradation. And then there was an article in a newspaper that cited studies that suggested that one is healthier when they're in a loving relationship. And I know somebody commented on the promo for this interview, you know, some heterosexual marriages are hell to live in. That's true.
Mm,
um, but they have the choice of whether or not to be married. So if you're in a loving relationship, it has a protective factor. Physically, a Yale study reported that men and women who felt more loved and supported had less blocked arteries. A study from Case Western
wow.
Reserve asked 10,000 married men the question, does your wife show you her love? Men who answered yes suffered less chest pain, less angina. And a study at Duke followed men and women with heart disease, and those who were single were 3 times more likely to have died after 5 years. In all three studies, the protective effects of love were independent of other risk factors.
Mm,
So it's a lot to be asking people to give up.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Let me just go back.
While you're just looking there, we've got another comment here from Stephen. I'm
Mm,
appreciating his honesty today. Thank you,
yes,
Stephen,
of
because
course.
obviously you two would be disagreeing on some of this. But he goes, this all boils down to one's interpretation of the scriptures. This has nothing. This has nothing with me not liking or disliking a gay person, but with my view of God's will.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's kind of when I interviewed Wayne Blakely too, he was kind of saying that as well. You've got to establish what is it that is your anchor. What's that thing that that tethers you to your, your solid rock. And like you were talking about your husband earlier, um, he's for him, his interpretation of the Bible sort of forms his narrative, really.
Mm. Um,
But I
and
guess
I
what does
don't
that
want to.
mean? Does that justify being unkind? And I don't think Stephen is unkind to
No,
people.
no, he's very polite in his
Mm,
comments and the discussion that we're having. I
mm,
really appreciate. I find it quite enjoyable to discuss this actually with him,
yeah.
without getting too intricately involved into the theology of it. Um, there's more in the Bible that tells me how I should be living as a woman that we don't do. No church does. There's no
Yeah.
church that requires everyone who belongs to it to have long hair, or there might be, but they don't have very many members. To not say anything, to remain silent in church. There's more in the Bible about that we don't actually follow than there is about homosexuality or gay people. Um, and I've forgotten my train of thought, but we look at this is what it was. We look at the rest of the Bible because there are positive things about women in the Bible. The way Jesus treated women, the way Paul, in his epistles, commented on how great a teacher Ananias and Sapphira were. So even though he says, "I forbid a woman to teach," he then praises this woman who's teaching. So we have to look at the rest of the Bible before we start trying to live exactly how all of these literal sort of things. And if we can do that for women, for that topic, which there's more in the Bible about, there's differences in the prices between men and women slaves. How much do you buy the woman for, and how much do you, if we can look at the theme of the whole Bible for those issues. Why can't we do it for this lovely group of people that we have been not including, that we have
Mm,
all these rules for, which don't affect our lives at all? You know,
yeah.
I can, if I believe that gay people should be celibate, it doesn't affect me because I'm not gay. So I don't
Mm,
have to live with those rules that I'm saying, you can't be saved unless you follow them.
mm.
I'm not comfortable with people telling me what rules I have to keep to be saved.
Yeah. It's
And
funny
I,
when I
I'm,
listen to Ted Wilson and his compliance document and his recent comments on the LGBT QIA plus community. There's a what's the word? A begrudging respect I have there, because he's clearly defining what he believes the
yeah,
church should look like. And what I find on the more liberal progressive side, the ones that are wanting to be allies of women and ordination and the gay community, etc., they're not as defined about that. So, like, I begrudgingly offer Ted a kind of, a bit of respect there, because he is, whether I think he's wrong or not, he's just saying, this is what I think. I'm making it clear.
yeah, I suppose, but like I said, he still doesn't have long bits of beard on the side of his face. So
Well,
if you
yeah, yeah,
he's not
and
following all of those things,
and like when
the ones
Stephen
that are
said,
important to him.
this boils down to one's interpretation of the scriptures. What I'd encourage people to do is, that doesn't make your interpretation correct. Just
Hmm.
because you've said, well, that's my interpretation, and, well, maybe look a bit deeper. I would love to see people like Ted, who, what a clanger of a mistake he made when he included,
Yeah,
I and A into an
person doesn't know what he's
abomination.
talking about.
It's like
Yeah,
ignorant. So I'm not trying to
yeah,
respect what he said. I'm just begrudgingly respecting people that, at least, like Stephen, they're just saying, this is what I
yeah.
think.
That's right.
It's really clear. You can then have a discussion with Stephen,
Yeah,
and you can agree or disagree because he's being clear. Now, he
that's right.
might change his mind down the track. He's not saying he won't. He's just saying, this is where I'm at, and I'm
If
clear
we-
about it.
yeah, if
And
we're
you're
both
saying, and
being
I'm
led
clear about it. Yeah.
if we're both being led by the Holy Spirit, one day we will agree. Whether
Yeah.
I go over to his side or he goes over to my
Mm.
side, or there's no sides,
Yeah. Or you
there are
agree to
so many
disagree.
wondrous things we have in store for us that we can't possibly comprehend. So
Yeah.
yeah, I believe if you are living, an ethical life, that's what I believe is important, living
Yeah.
living to your standards, to what you think is right. and growing, continue to grow.
And I guess I'm just saying that on the other side of that, there doesn't appear to be a Ted Wilson speaking up for that side of things. I really loved the era of Jan Paulson, where he
Yeah.
seemed to be way more inclusive of at
Oh,
least saying we accept. He wasn't saying I believe this or I believe that. He wasn't being defined like Ted in that realm. He
mm.
was at least saying I accept a diverse range of Adventist thought and belief. And
If you're going to choose your theology, if you're going to choose a Jehovah's Witness theology or an Adventist theology or a women affirming theology, why wouldn't you try and choose, like, because we all do. I think we all do. We choose a theology to believe in. Why wouldn't you choose one that aligns with the way Jesus lived his life?
yeah, I love when you remove all supernatural elements of looking at Jesus and his teachings, that they are still really great. Like if you
Mm,
remove the supernatural elements, even just looking at the parables that contain miracles, remove the miracle element and the teaching element, and they still hold a lot of value. And so I think, why don't, yeah, like you said, why don't people gravitate to that kind of and align themselves with
yeah.
movements that are teaching that?
And and people say, well, it's your cross to bear, it's your struggle, take up your cross and follow me. And yes, Jesus had a struggle in his life, but it wasn't because he was keeping all the laws and people were down on him for it. It was
Mm,
because he was standing up for the marginalized people, and
mm,
people were coming down on him for it. It
yeah.
wasn't the people,
Yes.
he wasn't suffering because he was denying himself cheese and eggs and
No, no.
and music with drums.
Yeah, yeah.
They killed him for being inclusive.
I know.
So
Boy,
if you're going to choose a theology to believe in, why would you not search for an inclusive theology? I mean,
yeah,
get the Greek scholars who know about it,
yeah,
respected within their fields.
yeah. Yeah, if you look at the thrust of what Jesus was saying, it's inclusivity. Um, you, if you want to drill down and alter the details of confusion and context, well, you'll have a much harder job of it. Can I just
He,
play? Can I just bring up? Floyd asked Stephen a really interesting question. Stephen, if you were born gay and you couldn't change that, how would you deal with it? Honest question. And Stephen has written back. Um, Floyd, I would have to follow my own advice and remain celibate. It might be a struggle, but I believe that God would reward me. And I guess what I'm interested in there in answer to Stephen, there's no demonstrable evidence that God has ever done that. Like has ever made it possible for a gay person to be happily celibate. Um, anyway, I'm treading into waters I don't really know much about,
there
but
are testimonies and things, but like
yeah,
that's their testimony, and it's not the majority.
there's always exceptions to the rule, and that's, I
Yeah.
guess, what I'm drilling into. Um, uh, Most say I feel very unrewarded by God, and that's why they fall into depression and angst
Hmm.
and all sorts of other side issues that come along, like depression and all sorts of different things. So I just say to Stephen, point where you can find someone, not mentioning names, but have you seen that as the norm for people that go, yeah, okay, well, I'm going to be celibate, and God has rewarded me for that. Anyway, that's a bit of a side thing, but I think it's
Yeah.
important. Sorry,
There's
carry
so
on.
much more to cover, but I don't think that we will have time. But there is one um, study that I wanted to find because it's really interesting, and I need to have it correct, or it may not sound. Um, this might be it. No.
While you're looking, I'll just keep
Yeah.
popping up a few other.
Yeah.
Well, Stephen has just said Jesus died for everyone. Okay.
Oh, yeah, I found it.
Someone else has written, great point. People choose their theology because there is so much contradiction. Time to use your own mind when it comes to this, right?
Hmm. So I found the section that I want to make sure that I cover, and then we can talk about some of the other topics if we have time. But I
Yeah,
understand, like, it's already an hour and a half.
that's a short interview for
Oh,
SDAQ&A. Come on,
really?
what are you talking about?
Okay, so I'm going to quote myself again, if that's okay.
Yeah.
In relation to the risky behavior sexual minorities often display, an interesting study by Heitzen Bulger, I can't pronounce his name, and colleagues, tried to determine if the religious climate of a community had any mediating effects on risk taking. So, the community's religious climate. They collected data from 31,852 high school students. So, it's quite a large study, which included 1,413 sexual minority students in Oregon. The researchers looked at 855 denominational groups in 34 Oregon counties. Two religion and sexuality expert coders gave each denomination a score based on the denomination's official statement about homosexuality. Sexual minorities living in counties with supportive religious climate were associated with fewer alcohol abuse symptoms and fewer sexual partners. The effects of the religious climate were stronger among sexual minority than heterosexual youth. So that protective factor is of a higher degree for our sexual minority students. Sexual minorities living in less supportive religious climates had higher levels of alcohol abuse and more sexual partners than the sexual minorities in the more supportive environments. I think that is such a powerful study, a large study that shows the protective factor of being supportive.
Wow. Yes. Yeah. And I wonder if that by supportive, are they meaning behind the scenes, or is that showing public support?
Well,
Is
the
is there a
study was
difference?
based on the official statement by the church.
Oh, right.
So the church's official,
That's
this is
the official
our
public statement.
policy. So they took the students' data and they took the denomination in that area and the students that lived in that area and had a look at the stats in that way. So the more supportive the official statement was, the less risky behavior.
Mm.
It was a
Wow.
protective factor.
Do
And if
what
you think
do
about it
just
logically, it makes sense because these kids are allowed to be in church where they're being told excessive alcohol consumption is not good. A
Yeah,
sexual
exactly.
promiscuity is not good.
Yeah.
And in
Yeah.
the communities where they're not accepting and they don't let them stay and be a part of the community, where do they go to? And that's why I love Floyd and Kinship because
Mm.
they can go there. They'll
Yeah,
be supported,
exactly.
they'll be looked after, they'll
Yeah.
be understood. And that's just such a
And yeah,
wonderful thing.
wonderful thing. And kinship is more than just a resource place you can tap into. They're a movement. Like
Mm,
they have events and
yeah.
I already in my brief time there am enjoying just feeling like I'm feeling accepted. It's like
And I really regret that the way that my life has gone, that I haven't had time to be a part of all of that
yeah,
because,
yeah,
we've been through some really rough stuff. I've come out the other side, hopefully.
yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
I can start getting more involved, but yeah, I haven't been a good kinship member.
There's no judgment.
Would
I
love
Floyd.
Floyd to come and share more with you guys. Love
Yeah,
it.
we're going to try and have a panel with Floyd and Ruth Ellen Mact and a few others to kind of discuss looking back over this kind of series. Actually, Floyd says something interesting in what I was referring to, because I think where there's always an exception to the rule, and he was saying thanks to Stephen for his response, and he added celibacy is a gift that isn't given to everyone. The Bible says, and that makes it difficult in real time. Humans are created to be in relationship, and I
Mm,
think yeah, that's a good point because um, what Stephen was saying, which reflects his opinion, that's great. But that everyone should be called to that celibacy. So yes, we might find people that are happy to be celibate and they're
Yeah,
fine
that's
with
right.
that, no problem.
I'm
But
not saying
no,
that you can't be celibate,
no,
you
go
know.
for it. And
Yeah,
that's where I'm glad that Floyd said that, because I was kind of
yeah.
drowning a bit in that, that part of the conversation.
Conversation.
So that's true. I mean, how do we expect everyone to be that? And I'd encourage Steve, when Alicia's book comes out, that'd be a great. I'd love his opinion on that book and how it makes
Yeah.
him kind of see. Does it challenge any of his views?
There's lots of other headings. We could dive into another one, or
Yeah,
we
let's dive in. Let's do another two.
could. I found this quote, and I'm not sure what part of the thing is it, but it's an interesting concept that because of the studies I mentioned at the very start, the more you know um, a gay person, the more accepting you are. But in our environments in church, um, they're less likely to come out. We're less likely to know that they're gay. So then we're not being exposed to that. So it's kind of like a negative exponential spiral, because
Mm,
it's an environment where you don't want to come out. So then people don't know. So then
it,
their
it
beliefs aren't
remains.
changed. It's
Yeah,
kind of a paradox, which is a shame.
yeah,
But I did really want to talk about internalized homophobia, because I think within our church there might be quite a few people struggling with that, especially if it's 6 to 10% of
yeah.
the population.
Which
You will know someone, you will know a parent of someone, you will know
mm,
a sibling of someone. And I talk about classrooms. The statistics sort of suggest there'd be at least 9 people within a normal sized class that are touched in some way by this. So it's not that it's just for 6 to 10% of people.
no,
It's it's there. It's relevant. It's important.
yeah. And
Um,
like you say, it's not just the person who may be
no.
struggling with this. And one thing I'd love, I'll put this out there right now. If anyone would like to be interviewed that is on the other side of it, that has been married or like uh, not same sex, but they were married to a gay man, for example, and
Mm,
then the relationship broke down when the guy admitted he's gay. I'd be very interested in hearing from anyone that would like to do an interview that is on that side of it. They're hurt by that. They feel betrayed, even.
yeah.
So we've got, on the
I
one hand, we've got someone being authentic, finally, to their true self,
yeah.
and then other people. But the other person, I totally understand. Their kids, their wives are really hurt. I'd love to chat to someone on about that if anyone would like to. And what are your thoughts on that?
I did quite a lot of research in that area until my supervisor pointed out that it wasn't relevant to my study, because I'm talking about high school students. But I can go to like my raw data, I like all the articles that I've saved if I still have it, because it's quite a while back now.
Mm,
2014 is when I started. And the research just shows the devastation, the brokenness, the really traumatic effects on the entire family. So, this sort of notion that, well, a successful change will be when you marry, has done so much damage,
yeah,
so much damage. But I haven't got like the stats in front of me, and I haven't
yeah.
even thought about it since 2015.
Well, if anyone approaches you or contacts me that would like to be interviewed to share their side of things about the pain they felt, the betrayal they felt, because no matter how much you can go, well, I'm glad that person's being honest now and they're being their true selves. But hey, I've just given 20, 30 years of my life to
Yeah,
you and I feel betrayed. I think that's an important feeling to acknowledge.
yeah. I'm kind of almost too uncomfortable to share this, but like I like being liked. I like that my husband likes me.
Yeah.
I I don't know. I wouldn't. It would be a huge loss to live with an intimate partner and that not be a part of our
Yeah.
lives.
Yeah. 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 Or, yeah. Or the gay person having to pretend that it is.
Yeah. I mean, you would feel apologetic every time you would try to be intimate. Like you would, I'm
Yeah.
sorry you have to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. And then
That's not healthy.
the receiver looks back and goes, so every time we did that,
You
it was a
were,
lie.
yeah. I mean, it's such a personal, such a, it's a tiny little corner of yourself you don't share with anyone else.
Yeah, yeah,
So it would be a major betrayal if you
yes,
didn't know,
yeah,
and
and
awkward if you did.
yeah, I think it'd be very cathartic for the conversation, at least for if anyone's willing.
Mm.
And definitely, I mean, I'll try and put a little bit of pressure on the pastors to come and demonstrate that they are allies, but I would never put even a hint of pressure on
And
anyone.
they might be surprised, like I was. Once I started, like, I was so scared to talk openly about it, but I was talking to a teacher just yesterday. Oh, do people not believe? They were surprised that I would be worried. Oh, that's
Mm,
not what it's like in Adventism at all. In fact, they didn't even know that there's an official church statement on it. They don't think about it because
yeah,
it just makes sense to why would our church think that?
yeah, yeah. And where can you find if we won't read it now, but where maybe someone can put it in the links in the comments as a link for me? Where is the church's official statement found?
I found it on a web page way back
Yeah,
when.
someone might be able to
It was
share
the
that with us and
official.
we can put it up.
It was the official GC web page.
Mm, mm,
And I have actually, in my original, I've got my original 2,500. I had, but this was back in 2006. I had the official church statement and the Bible verses it was based on.
mm.
I don't know if I can find it. I didn't highlight it.
Interesting to compare that official statement with the current official
Yeah,
statement.
which I haven't looked up. I haven't done
Yeah.
my homework before the interview.
No, that's all right. I only just thought of it now.
Yeah.
Um,
Stephen is asking, how do you feel about bisexuals?
yeah.
And what I would say to him, looking at research and statistics on marriage, 50% divorce rate, 70% adultery rate within marriages. If you find someone that you love and loves you, grab onto that, hold it in a safe place and keep it, because it's rare. And I feel extremely blessed to be in the relationship that I'm in. I thank God every day. I used to be really, really scared because of the statistics, because I'm a thinking person. Oh, something's going to happen. Like, this is too good to be true. And I used to, for a while, I was like living in fear. It's like, oh, just enjoy it while you have it.
Mm,
For every day that you have it, just enjoy it. And if that person happens to be same sex, I would cherish it. If it
mm,
Like, I wouldn't say, "Oh, no, I'm not going to explore this relationship with you," because there's like 2 verses in the Bible that talk about sexual acts,
mm,
um, and I don't wanna jeopardize my relationship with God because of that. Like, I would go on a journey and do some reading and yeah, so that's my opinion. Not being, a bisexual myself, you know, I haven't experienced it. I don't know. You'd have to.
mm,
I think it would be great to talk to someone if they were willing to share. Like I said, like, we're asking all these personal questions all the
mm,
time. Um, yeah, so some people are just so gracious when they
yeah.
answer these questions. I feel like it's such an invasion just because 'cause we're curious,
Yeah.
you know?
I know.
That's not a
I
reason to
know. It's
invade
yeah.
somebody's
A lot
intimate.
of us, in many ways, within Adventism, um, this is a pioneering kind of a conversation, and I think, like you say, a lot of people are being gracious to the allies who are kind of coming in and perhaps you know having two left feet.
Yeah, I'm sure that I do that, especially because I remember that, I think back to that little girl who was socially challenged, and I think I still have a bit of that in me, and I know I put my foot in it all the time, so I
Mm.
apologize, and feel free to tell me, because if you don't, it'll just fly straight over my head.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that sort of stuff. We only have 3 days: yesterday, today, and tomorrow to worry about. Floyd again puts up an interesting comment. With the I've just forgotten how to say the word. The and symbol, amplet, a-
Ampersand,
amulet, or yeah, something ampersand. Anyway, I know it so well, and I've just gone, what is that? Anyway, someone will write it in for me. But people who support women's ordination often wear that little,
yeah.
like a little brooch kind of thing. And I
Yeah.
think it sends a lovely symbol. It's a lovely symbol to send. And Floyd's written it would be wonderful and quite a surprise some Sabbath if all non-cisgender, non-hetero Adventists would have a rainbow above their head. Folks would be astounded how many there would be. And
Yeah.
I'm saying, well, maybe instead of a big rainbow, just put a little rainbow brooch. We could.
I often have little, and now I'm coming clean about it. I often try and include rainbows whenever I can in my
Yeah,
jewelry, on my computer case. My umbrella is a rainbow umbrella, just in case people were wondering, is it safe? Nobody's
yeah.
ever come out to me before though, so it's all for naught. But
Oh,
yeah, I try. I just happen to love bright colors anyway, so
yeah, yeah.
it's convenient that way.
Well, let's raise one more topic and that
All
you've
right.
got there, and then we'll say farewell for today. But let's, if you're open to it, I'd love to get you back, and we can talk about a few other
Yeah.
things as well, and maybe when Alicia's book has come out.
Yeah.
We could get
Really
a
looking
few of
forward
us together to chat about the book as well, and her also. She's agreed to come back on the program when her book's out.
really enjoyed her interview as well.
It
And
was
she said
great.
she's quite conservative as a theologian, and
Yeah,
it's quite easy to find positive um find a positive gay theology within conservatism, being
yeah,
conservative with
even harder.
your theology, which I wouldn't know anything about. I'm not a theologian, but I mean, I assume that because there's so few verses in the Bible about it. Like there
Yeah,
are thousands and thousands and thousands about looking after each other.
yeah,
And that's why I feel like I need to listen to that more than those few verses that confuse me basically. I'm like, why
yeah,
would a loving God be expecting this?
yeah,
Doesn't make sense to me.
yeah.
So I thought I would just talk about internalized homophobia. That was the next thing on next heading. Um, and one author that I looked at describes internalized homophobia as a set of negative attitudes about homosexuality, which is developed in pre-sexual identification socialization. So before you know that you're gay, you are being taught to hate yourself, basically. Um, and the fact that that happens before you can properly cognitively think about it, I think is just such a sad thing. Um,
Mm,
it's subsequently applied to an individual's perception of self once they become aware. Um, so teachings that happen since the person was born and negative attitudes internalized well before they're old enough to question or resist them. Um, one of the findings that I looked at that people with we talked about that already, the post-conventional religious reasoning. So I'll just skip that.
mm,
So if you're able to challenge those ideas that you were taught before you could think rationally,
mm,
you'll have better mental health outcomes. In a literature review that I looked at, studies were cited that reported internalized homophobia is related to lower self-acceptance, lower self-esteem, depression, sexual dysfunction, avoidance of relationships, substance abuse, unsafe sexual behavior. Their own studies results were that internalized homophobia predicted lower levels of sexual identity development, related to lower levels of self-esteem, negative self-concepts, lower perceived attractiveness, lower emotional stability, and higher levels of sex guilt. So, if you are in a environment where you can't form your sexual identity in a healthy way, and you are taught before you can reason that this is a bad thing, obviously that's going to have some really negative effects on your health and well-being,
yeah.
which is why I want to address why I feel so passionately about it.
Mm. Yes, because that's interesting because you're kind of addressing that any kind of issue here is not just even at the extreme where it's a life and death issue, which it is, and that's something that one of the
Okay.
reasons we're talking about it.
Yeah.
But right back from that to a healthy sense of well-being, there's all sorts of points of health issues
Yeah.
that can be mild to worse and worse and worse, and ultimately the worst kind.
Yeah.
And boy, it's needed, isn't it? It's really important, I think, for the viewers that are watching to think seriously about coming out as an ally.
Mm.
I think the Adventist Church would greatly benefit from that. Um, I think Gwen Wilkinson Slight has given us the link to
All the
the
statement.
Adventist. Yeah, so it's a little
Yeah.
bit of a. I don't think when you're watching these, you can click on the link. You can in the comments, and it'll take you there. And I think that's in
I
that's
wouldn't
a
want to.
comment on the Facebook group there,
Yeah.
so people can link on that. But there, um, if you just typed in religiousinstitute.org and then put you know
Yeah.
homosexuality statement, you'd find it. Thank you, Gwen.
So some of the other headings that I have that we can talk about later, I've got a whole heap on change therapy. I've got stuff on. I think we already talked about that though. Celibacy, school environment. Um, there's a lot on the school
I
environment.
did really want to talk into the change therapy one. That's a fascinating one. Can we just maybe talk a little bit about that before
Yeah.
we say farewell? Because that is
So
a
the
really
things
important one.
that I've highlighted. Change therapy in adolescence can be a traumatic time. Minors have reported being sent to reorientation camps by their parents and/or advice of a pastor, sometimes against their will. There have been a wide range of treatments, including testosterone therapy, behavior modification, hydrotherapy, support groups, hypnosis, religious study, shock treatment, improved breathing, and biting towels. Lesbian treatments included lobotomies, clitorectomies, hormone treatments, electric shock therapy. Treatment has often considered a success if the outcome was heterosexual sex, marriage, or celibacy. And we just looked at all of those things and how detrimental to mental health and physical health they all are. So their criteria for success is torture, basically.
Yeah, yeah. Or major physiological modification
Hmm.
that doesn't work anyway. This is an important one that Stephen, again, thank you for being so much of the program today, Stephen. I've almost
Yeah,
wanted to send you the link and invite you in.
I have
um,
stats on that
this is a really important one because I'd love
in
to
the
hear stats
well-being.
on that. I know in the trans community, it is much higher, isn't it?
That I haven't actually done research on that, but from the programs I've been watching with you, yes, I think you said 50% attempt, or
Yeah,
is that change therapy? No, that's the change therapy.
I think, yeah, I remember that. That was something to do with the data on those who have been through change therapy and those who haven't. Those who have been through it have a higher chance of committing
Yeah.
suicide. But
Just to
generally
answer,
speaking, yeah,
sorry. To answer Stephen saying you're saying the suicide rate is higher among gay people, that is exactly true. If someone has had trouble changing his or her orientation, has tried celibacy and failed at that too, his or her religious beliefs may lead him or her to feel rejected by God, condemned to hell, condemned by their church, and suffering from guilt, shame, depression, and self loathing. This emotional state often leads to risky behavior. Galifo and colleagues, in a study sample of 4,159 high school students, found that sexual minority young men who felt stigmatized and held negative views about homosexuality were more likely to engage in risky behavior. Wolfenheim's also cited a study that found sexual minority youth who are pressured to stay in the closet are more likely to search for romantic liaisons in risky venues such as clubs, gay bars, gay cruising areas, and gay websites. There are also studies that report sexual minorities are more likely to abuse alcohol and drugs, smoke cigarettes, and use marijuana. These risky behaviors are also more prevalent when the young people feel rejected by their communities and feel isolated. They postulate that, after all, one is less likely to self protect from harmful substances and behaviors when one feels devalued and second class in comparison to their heterosexual peers. And then, unfortunately, sexual minorities experience higher amounts of suicide attempts than their peers. Wolf and Himes did a study in 2009 that found that they attempted suicide at a rate of 8.4 times higher than their peers. Another study found that sexual minorities who felt rejected by their family and peers had a suicide rate of 50%. That's where I got that from. And a statistical report in the US put out by the CDC claimed that suicide was the leading cause of death for youth aged 10 to 24, but it was the leading cause of death for sexual minorities. And many studies have shown that the suicide rate for sexual minorities is between 2 to 3 times greater than their peers.
Wow.
There's more. Of special interest to us, a study by Harris in 2013, online questionnaire filled out by over 1,000 sexual minority youth. The sexual minorities who are at risk of suicide also reported less social support and greater depressive symptoms. This shows that social and family support is vitally important. 2009, Carl Walker Hoover did. Oh, this is a really sad example, and I'll read it. And if this is the last thing I read, in 2009, Carl Walker Hoover did not receive that support. On April 6th, he went home from school, and he got an extension cord and weaved it through the rafters of his bedroom and slipped it around his neck in a noose. He was 11 years old.
Oh my God.
He committed suicide because the students at his school were calling him faggot, making daily homophobic remarks and threatening him. Carl's school took donations to help Carl's family and offered counseling to staff and students after his death. What the school didn't do is address the more than 20 phone calls Carl's mother made to the school from September 2008 complaining about the abuse. And then I say research needs to be done. That's my justification, like in the Lit Review, for doing research.
11, an 11-year-old. And that makes me think we need to highlight it wouldn't matter if it was no high chance. You look into your issues that everyone's having, and if there's any reason that's making anyone kill themselves, I think right across the board, if people are feeling included and loved at home and in community, I think that is what will bring down the stats on suicide across the board.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, someone's just written an important thing there. Boy, that's powerful stuff. It's interesting, you know, you were talking about being liked before, and I get so much hate mail. It's amazing. You wouldn't believe it. And what surprised me, I'm fine, honestly, but I get it from all spectrums of Adventism. And it's a really interesting thing because earlier on, if I was speaking to one topic and there was support for it, you'd have hate mail from one side of people, but you'd get a lot of support from the group that you were speaking to.
Yeah.
This topic garners hate mail from every faction.
It's really controversial. If you don't care about anything else, they care about this. And that's one of the reasons why people stay silent. They don't talk about it. And I had the privilege of not being gay to be able to just stay quiet, which is...
Yeah. I will say that initially that wave of hate gives way to a confidence that is really good, I must say. So those that are thinking, oh, I couldn't speak up because, boy, if Pete's getting hate mail and I get hate mail, I'm going to hate that feeling. Honestly, I promise you, after a short amount of time, any of that kind of, whoa, this is a bit too much to take, that dissipates and a clarity comes on board that is magnificent. So
I think
embrace the hate mail, I say.
to me, like comments from people I don't know on Facebook, they don't bother me at all because I don't know them. I think what would be harder is if somebody that I really loved and cared about was making my life difficult, that would be hard. And maybe that will come. I don't know, but
Yeah.
at least I have a loving partner that I can.
Yeah, you've got a good situation there, and I do too. I do too.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I've got the 2 girls who are great, but I've definitely had the hate mail from those who like and love you previously,
yeah.
that's for sure. Or who
There was just one other thing I wanted to say in regards to the school atmosphere is that, especially at Christian schools, studies have shown that when you tell a teacher that you're being mistreated because you are gay, or even if you're not gay, but they're calling you gay, teachers don't know what to do with that because they don't want to encourage people to think it's okay to be gay. So then often, and this is research that says often they won't come down on it because then they'll be seeing as supporting the gay lifestyle. And so
Yeah,
that is a problem that happens in schools as well, but possibly like the of fundamental religions. Hopefully not our schools. But
yeah,
if teachers are educated, which sounds like is happening at least in some Adventist schools, about how to handle that, the best way to be supportive, it's just so important.
yes, yeah, 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 yeah. Let's put up the final comment
Mhm.
from Floyd, who I think deserves the final post comment here, and then we'll give you the final word, Tammy. That this is a topic where one can speak in theory or in reality. The church chooses to talk in theory, but talk to an actual LGBTQIA person, and you can get reality. And these stories aren't isolated.
Mm. And Floyd, that sentiment is backed up by research. At the start of the show, when I said there's like at least 31 um, peer-reviewed research articles that show that the more you know a person, um, the the more you change your attitude about the topic.
Yeah. And sorry, I did say Floyd would have the last word there, but Stephen wrote, I suspect there are good people on both sides of this issue. You suspect, do you, Stephen? You suspect there might be from your position of
Oh,
authority there. We all have to learn to agree to disagree. And I'd suggest, Stephen, that's great. But once you've dug deep into both sides, maybe, I'm not sure, maybe you have. You might be truly versed on all the clobber texts and everything. But I think there's, yeah, for sure, everyone comes to a time where they can agree to disagree. But I think you can only say, I agree, we have to agree to disagree if you've done a lot of research.
yeah. And I do enjoy the research, and I love being challenged now. It was a bit hard to start with, but I now I'm like, oh, that's an interesting issue. I haven't got time to look into it, but if you're interested in it, do the research. Go and look into it. Don't trust me to look into it for you.
Yeah,
I'll bring my biases and my preconceived notions to the issue, whereas you can start from scratch. You got a brain, go ahead, like use it.
yeah, yeah, exactly. There we go. Floyd does get that final comment in. No doubt people are good. That isn't the question. But people are misinformed, and even good people can be willfully misinformed. So that's all we're saying. Dig in,
So
dig deep.
wise, Floyd. I'm
And
glad I know you.
yeah, I've really enjoyed getting to know Floyd and a bunch of people from the LGBT community. Well, hey, I've just found a little overlay that may be appropriate to this conversation. Let's see, is this? That's
Oh,
kind of rainbowish, isn't it?
yeah.
So, any last last words? I mean, you what a journey you've been on. We've seen that reflected in this conversation.
Yeah.
What are some thoughts you could add, just to, as we say farewell for this conversation? We'll have you back for more later.
I'm not good being put on the spot. I like to be prepared,
Prepared.
but I think, yeah, just if people are being hurt, and I think actually Floyd does it because he said much harm is done in God's name. If 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 your God is requiring you to hurt people to follow him, maybe do some more research. on what you think God's requiring you to do. So important.
Yeah. 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 That's a very good good comment to leave this conversation on.
Mm.
Thank you, Tammy Pannekoek, for your time today. I've really appreciated the conversation.
I'm flattered that you thought of me.
I remember noticing in the comments you're writing there, and I thought, this is great. And it's interesting, when you first wrote, I did think, oh, and no judgment, but I thought that you may have taken a more conservative view on it. Um, and then I just kept reading. I thought, oh, wow, this is interesting. There's been a change in your,
Yeah,
um,
from when you used to know me.
yeah. And like I say, no judgment. I wouldn't have been feeling any less of you at all, but it was just interesting because I thought, like, on another group in Voice, SDA People's Voice, uh, and I won't mention his name, but a high level division, Australian division um, employee was commenting with someone else there about women's ordination, and and they gave the public the toe the line kind of policy church statement, and then indicated in another little comment that they were supportive of women's ordination. So I wrote to them on that wall and said, so are you actually saying publicly, this is a public forum, that you support women's ordination? And they said, what I agreed to in the other comment is a yes. So they were still a bit evasive, but
Oh,
it's the first time I've seen a little kind of crack in the in the wall there, the barrier. And I'm going to invite that person on to do an interview and to see if they will say yes. But where I was going with that is when I saw you commenting, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to get you to speak here, because we want that kind of we want that barrier to be brought down, and the more people that speak up as allies, I think the more people will feel safe to
yeah,
give it a go.
yeah,
So thank you so much for chatting with us today, Tammy. We'll look forward to catching you another time.
yeah. Thank you.
And thanks everyone for watching today. It's been really great to have this conversation, and thank you for being with us. We'll look forward to seeing you all next time.